that we are looking at the Russians in this offensive, in this push, really exposing themselves, stretching out their supply lines.
Now, Ukraine, at least 47 people have been killed in a Russian missile attack on a city in central Ukraine, more than 200 injured. The airstrike on Poltava is one of the worst since the invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, is calling for allies to step up their military support. He called those responsible for this attack scum. Let's talk to the reporter, Zach Anders, who is there in Ukraine. Hello to you, Zach.
Hi, John. How are you?
Well, thank you for coming on, Zach. What's the latest on this awful attack in Poltava?
You know, as you mentioned, this is one of the largest strikes since the full scale began. What has been interesting is the air attacks over the last 2 weeks have been intense on both sides. The Ukraine and Russia are both really going at it, trying to test each other's air defense systems. I suspect that because of the scale of the attacks, the drones and the ballistic missiles that have been used over the last 2 weeks, that both sides have a really good idea of where air defenses have been placed. And it does take a bit of time to be able to shuffle the board and move some of these air defenses around. So I think Russia had probably a pretty good idea of Ukraine's air defense array at the time of this strike. We've been seeing large-scale attacks, these saturation attacks with drones and missiles over the last few weeks. This is different. This was in central Ukraine. The Ukrainian authorities say just 2 ballistic missiles were launched at a very specific location. This is a training facility for the Ukrainian military. Also, they're calling this a telecommunications center as well. And this is in central Ukraine. It's the road that you take between Ukraine's 2 largest cities, Kyiv and Kharkiv. You would stop through, and in fact, I did just a few days ago in Poltava. It's about halfway between both cities. So really a massive moment that we're seeing play out again. And I have a colleague there at the moment who is describing just a horrendous scene with the number of dead and wounded, obviously overwhelming a small medical center there in that city.
Right, so the bombardment then goes on. I'm reading fears about maybe a nuclear accident being caused by this bombardment. We've heard that fear being expressed before, but is there a particular reason for concern now?
You know, I think everybody should hold off just for the moment and not speculate as to what could be taking place here. A lot of like Zaporizhia, for example, some of those reactors are actually offline, but the plant still needs power. The entire nuclear across the country, across Ukraine, and even into eastern Russia as well. The main concern is that these are very delicate systems that if they go offline, if they lose power, you're going to be looking at another Chernobyl. So every moment is very precarious, but this one in particular, taking it baby steps. Don't want to alarm anyone with what's been taking place.
Well, exactly. The Ukrainian leadership seem to have taken some satisfaction from the incursion into Russia, into the Kursk region. Is it, though, fair to say that hasn't achieved anything very much by way of diverting Russia's military assault? It has not changed the way that they're seeking to just grab control of the Donbass.
You know, I felt that way going into Ukraine for the last 2 weeks. I have a different view now that I've been into Kursk and I've seen what the Ukrainian defensive posture looks like in the southeast. It's too early to say whether this has been successful, unsuccessful. What is becoming more and more apparent is the Russians are hell-bent on moving towards Pokrovsk. Obviously, the Ukrainians are evacuating the civilians from the city now, so that's a grim picture. But the Russians are extending themselves into this area, and they're facing extreme losses. And we're getting some chatter on Telegram through some of the Ukrainian military bloggers that potentially there's been in the last few hours, Ukrainian counteroffensive into some of these areas that they had just lost. So that might be symbolic that we are looking at the Russians in this offensive, in this push, really exposing themselves, stretching out their supply lines, and opening up flanks that they just destroyed some of those defenses that that the Ukrainians were holding, that they could potentially use. Well, they're destroyed now, so they're very exposed. I think we'll probably in a few days have a better picture of what whether this is successful or unsuccessful. But while this is taking place, we're still getting reports that the Ukrainians are gaining ground in Kursk still. So this has been a remarkable few weeks. But I think just a few more days, and we can maybe have some more clarity as to whether or not this has been, a success or a failure.
We really need to keep in close touch on that. Is the feeling there in Ukraine that the Ukrainian war effort is being hindered by their inability to use long-range missiles supplied by their partners?
100%. And we heard Zelensky every single day say as much. What would make the difference here? And this kind of, if you zoom out and you look at this tactically about where Russian forces are situated, ground forces that is, they need that air support. They need to be able to level some of these villages with these Russian bombers shooting out of, they're firing these bombs, these glide bombs, way out of range of the Ukrainian air defenses. If they could knock out those bombers, those ground forces are not going to be able to advance into these areas that they've just basically leveled. That's the Russian tactics, of course, throughout the course of this war, is level and then move in. And if they did in this moment, if they did have the opportunity to, let's say tonight, they were striking Russian air bases, this offensive towards Pokrovsk, I would make a bet here that would grind to a halt, and the Ukrainians would be able to hold and defend this area, because it's the air campaign that has been really hindering the Ukrainians' ability to defend. That said, I think what we have noticed in the last 2 weeks, and we've been talking about at length, the air attacks that have been going back and forth, they've been tremendous. I mean, what we've been seeing, the amount of air attacks on both sides targeting the energy infrastructure, I think is a symptom, perhaps, of how the ground situation is eroding in certain places. You see Ukraine has been targeting these oil depots, and they even hit refinery in the Moscow region as well. That is, they're trying to hit each other where it hurts, both sides, and it's really starting to escalate into deeper and more intense air attacks from both sides. Can Ukraine sustain and keep up at this pace that Russia does with this air campaign? Probably not. So this is a lot of movement that we're seeing before the winter period, before November, when this conflict traditionally will start to freeze up. So it's very interesting to watch what's happening right now. I think there's a lot of movement that could potentially lead to a dam burst moment, potentially. We just also saw a report from Reuters today that there's talks that the U.S. could supply these JASSM missiles, these cruise missiles that are mounted to F-16s. A 1,000-pound warhead has about a 200-plus mile range. This would be the kind of weapon you would use to strike. It's a stealth cruise missile and would be able to evade Russia's air defenses. It could hit these air bases. It could be a game changer.
Well, thank you for that update, Zach, and your perspective. Let's thank Zach Anders there, who's been live on the line for us from Ukraine.